Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Kellam, the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott, welcoming you to this week's edition of Encounter. This is another one of my back porch programs, since we're not in the studio these days and since I don't really care much for the Zoom stuff. Here we are on my back porch. And my guest today is somebody who's really been around. And what I mean by that is that she has been, and I'm guessing, you can correct me now,
okay.
Baptist, Lutheran, United Church of Christ, Presbyterian, Methodist, and I guess that's an Episcopalian, because you worked at a Episcopal hospital.
Yeah. Not becoming all those things, but I've worked with all those denominations.
Right. So you didn't join them necessarily,
No.
but you were so ecumenical in spirit.
Yes, my dad was Roman Catholic, and my mother was a Protestant at Presbyterian.
Wow.
So,
and tell me about the Baptist connection.
well, I was raised Baptist. We moved to Scotch Plains, New Jersey, which is in North Jersey, for the first 14 years of my life. And my mother tried the Presbyterian church in town, but didn't find it terribly friendly. So she tried the Baptists, and she loved them.
Yeah.
Scotch Plains Baptist Church, and that's where we were taken and baptized eventually. I was 12 when I was baptized, because that's the Baptist way.
My guest today is Janet Abel, the Reverend Janet Abel, and we want to talk about a number of things. We'll talk some more about the ecumenical background of working with so many different traditions, but we'll also be talking about what it's like to pastor a church which is in the process of closing after a long and wonderful presence in the Union District of Endicott. And then we'll also talk about her work for many years at Elizabeth Church and St. Louise Manor, the United Methodist Homes facilities.
On Upper Front Street.
Right.
Across from Cracker Barrel is what I tell everybody.
And you've been there as a chaplain how long?
19 years now.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Well, where should we begin? Let's start with this journey you've been on from you can't hold a job? Or
Well, according to the United Methodists, I can, since I've been there 19 years.
Yes.
But my background has been rather ecumenical. Just starting with my parents. My father was raised Catholic, was an altar boy. And my mother was extremely Protestant, proud of her heritage. And when they got married, of course, it was a big deal back in 1946. Some family didn't really get over, the mixing of religion.
Right.
And so I would go to Sunday school at 9 o'clock in the morning at Scotch Plains Baptist, and then go to Mass with my friends. I grew up in a very Catholic Jewish neighborhood. So I babysat for a Jewish family and went to the Seder one year. I've always been very interested in all religion and loved the Mass. What I really loved about the Catholic Church, it was so much fancier than my Baptist church. They had statues and candles and incense. Found it all fascinating. One time I lit the candles, and I was told by a priest, "What are you doing, young lady?" And I said, "Oh, the candles are just so pretty." He said, "Well, they're actually for prayer, and you have to give us money." I said, "Oh." So he sat me down and explained that.
Yeah.
He was very kind, and so I never did that again. So we learned by doing. So with that interest and being interested in all faiths, I think it made a good background for being a chaplain, where you have to meet everybody where they're at.
Yeah.
I deal with many denominations, Christian, Jewish. We haven't had a Muslim yet or a Buddhist, but certainly all the Christian denominations and some Jewish people. So.
And I went online at the Elizabeth Church in St. Louise Manor. I have to keep looking down at that so I don't call it the Elizabeth Louise Church Manor. And it mentioned in the worship traditions there, Mass. You don't do the Mass, though.
No, but I coordinate the priest. And in fact, in these COVID days, we're finally getting the priests back, both in the nursing home section and assisted living. We've had a priest move in, Father Stanley Gerlach, who's been in the area a long time. He's now an independent resident at St. Louise Manor. So he's been doing our Mass for the independent residents. I do all the Protestant services. Once upon a time, pre-COVID, we had other speakers, all kinds of speakers. I never called you, but I will now. All different faiths to give the residents some variety, and hopefully we'll be getting that again.
Sure. And through this very trying period, it must have been really challenging to be a chaplain in an institution where families were not allowed to visit.
Right. We closed down last March, a year and a half ago. We closed down completely. So we had no services. We had no groups meeting of any kind. I did what I could. Another chaplain told me about having hymn sings and kind of services in the hallways. So we put residents in their doorways and do that. We did anything we could to give them services. I had handed out lots of handouts, Bible studies, sermons. I wrote my sermon and illustrated it every week. And then finally, slowly but surely, we've had little groups, and I've been doing those services ever since. Yeah. And finally now, of course, the families are back in with regulations. Everybody's masked still. And we meet in groups, but we're spaced out still, and the residents are masked as well. I'm really glad about the mandate, both federal and state, that says that all the staff have to be vaccinated.
Yep.
It just gives us some more peace of mind, and most of the residents are vaccinated. And we had a very bad time in between Thanksgiving and Christmas last year, where we did get COVID in the facility, and we did lose residents. This past May, we had a special memorial that was very well attended. We remembered all of them. We had a memorial placed in the front of the building with a plaque and a tree. So people got a lot of comfort out of that.
And are you able to be a chaplain to the families even at a time when they were not allowed to come in?
As much as I could. Phone, cards, iPad visits, because they couldn't physically come in. So I had a couple meetings outside, even in the cold weather. We'd just bundle up and sit on in the gazebo.
Sure. Well, I speak from experience, having a family member in an assisted living center, and being not allowed to visit is a very difficult thing.
Very difficult. Of course, I would see families visit through the window, and then we started to allow them into the lobby or outside in the nicer weather. We did what we could, because it is so hard, and especially when people are near death. That rule got relaxed pretty quickly, that the families of people who were actively dying could come in. Yeah. So, and the priests too. Right. We do allow for priests to come in and give Sacrament of the sick.
Yeah. Eventually, I want to interview the new chaplain who works with the Broome County Council of Churches at Wilson Hospital about proper etiquette for those of us who visit those in the hospital. Tell me just briefly about a little bit of etiquette about when you visit someone in a nursing home.
I would say the same things hold true. If it's not family, really close family, you make your visit short, and you don't come first thing. 10, 11 is usually perfect, or mid to late afternoon. People are usually more awake, either, right before lunch or right before dinner. Those are the best times. People need their rest, and don't stay too long. Those are the basic ones. Yeah. And don't worry about what you're going to say. I've had church members, so many over the years, tell me, I'd visit more, but I don't know what to say. And I always reassure people, it doesn't matter. It's your presence, number one. And your prayer doesn't have to be perfect. If you want to pray, please pray. And
just be conversational.
Exactly.
Don't worry about the King James English. Just
don't worry.
Be yourself.
Right.
Yep.
People love to get that visit from their former life. It reminds them, I didn't always live in a nursing home. I haven't always been in the hospital. So
good. Yeah. And the training to be a chaplain, this isn't a matter of, I tried being a pastor at a church, and I guess I'll be a chaplain for a while.
I think that might be a stigma for some people who think, why are you a chaplain? But I've served churches too. Throughout my whole career, I've also been a pastor. But
you had
there is specialized training.
Yes.
After I graduated seminary, which was Princeton, I did And my committee, they wanted us to do CPE, which stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. So I chose a hospital. You can choose a prison or a school too. And I went down to Houston, Texas, and that's where I got involved with the Episcopals. Houston Heart Center and St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital. So the communion was fancy that we had to do, but learned a lot. I was there a year and a half, so I did an internship and a residency. And that's your primary training to be a chaplain. We were chaplains on the job, handed units, and we were there on call once a week, and I think we did a weekend once a month. So high trauma. Yeah. We were also affiliated with Texas Children's, which was tough, and MD Anderson Cancer Center.
I remember a story from my days in Richmond, Virginia, when a chaplain was on his way to the Medical College of Virginia, part of Virginia Commonwealth University, and he was on his way and was in a car accident. Mm-hmm. So he was taken to the Medical College of Virginia, where he recovered as a patient. Mm-hmm. And he said that all the clinical pastoral education was helpful, but not as helpful as being on the receiving end of care. Right. And so that was an important...
It is a huge lesson.
Yeah.
And I think you don't really get it until you actually are a patient. And I have been. Oh. I've been very, very blessed health-wise, but I had a major surgery a year and a half ago, and I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I was right about keeping your visits short. That was really right on. Yeah. But and I got a lot out of people visiting and praying for me. Yeah. That felt really good. Yes. I have to say, it's part of your recovery.
Yeah. And I think that short visit, you go to visit, but you have to realize you're not the only person who felt like going to visit.
Exactly. Plus all the staff and everything they're doing. Yeah. You're exhausted. You're not sleeping well at night at all.
Sure.
And you're recovering. Yep. And sleep is critical to that. Yep. Yeah.
So our guest today is Janet Abel. She is the chaplain at Elizabeth Church and St. Louis Manor, and she's served a variety of churches in a variety of situations and denominations. Most recently, I guess you were at Holy Nativity Lutheran Church on Main Street in Endicott, which is just a couple of blocks east of our church in the Union District. I remember my mother talking about the pastor there as she grew up in the neighborhood. And so I don't think she went there because she was my parents were married at Union Presbyterian Church. But she had some sort of affection for that it was a red shingle church at that time, I think. And then tell me about your being called to that church knowing that it was on the verge of closing. Is that right?
Yes, they had a big meeting right before I started. And almost closed. But they had a couple of members who were in their high 90s and they wanted to stay open for them. Small little group. It was a wonderful experience. I got this church because I'm in a lectionary group, a long-time lectionary group, where one of the members is Reverend Ken Wood. He's a Methodist, and he's retired, but he served at Holy Nativity for about 6, 7, 8 years and had a wonderful experience. But told me they were closing, probably. They need somebody, because he was finally retiring, as he put it. So I said, I'm very interested. I had been at the Congregational Church downtown helping out. But I'm really glad I went there. It was 3 years long. When I started, we had a big meeting, and we looked at our money in the bank, and we figured out how much we were spending a year. Money wasn't, membership wasn't increasing, money was going down. And we realized in 3 years, we'd have just enough money to close with integrity, pay all our bills, make decisions about the building. And that's what we decided to do. Yeah. Because in 3 years' time, the church turned 100. We never dreamed we'd be closing the church and having a celebration like that in the time of COVID, but we did celebrate online. Yeah. And 2 months after that celebration, which was October, the doors closed December 31st. We did have a hymn sing. We let the church members come into the sanctuary, their beloved, really beautiful little sanctuary, and they got to spend some time there. They got to buy some hymnals, their old family hymnals, and chrismons from the chrismon tree. And I'm really very proud of this church. We made some tough decisions. The council and I worked together to close it. There's lots of legalities, and it took a lot of time. All the church records have to be archived and sent to Philadelphia. And one of the other things we decided to do was, we talked about the building. We are not a profit-making institution, so the church decided to gift it. If there was a congregation who needed a church, we were going to give it to them.
Right.
And not put it on sale. And that's exactly what they did. So the legacy of a church continues in a really beautiful sanctuary. The fellowship hall looks spanking new because they were flooded, and they redid their fellowship hall, so that's beautiful too.
That was in 2011.
Right,
the flood,
that last flood in 11. And next door is a really big, beautiful old house with lots of porches and lots of room. That's the church office, and tons of Sunday school rooms. So we're glad that this new church, it's a little church, it's Pentecostal, but they've got lots of kids. So the Sunday school rooms are full again, which hasn't been true for Holy Nativity in a while.
Right.
You know, our nativity scene is going to be using all of the costumes, and it's a good thing. So,
Joan and I, when we first moved here, were in a lectionary study group in the basement of that.
so was
of that
I.
church.
I belonged to that lectionary group too.
Okay.
Elaine Berg was the pastor at the time.
Yeah, this
And
was after that, right?
I think maybe, because I joined another one, but we met in the basement in the fellowship hall there for years.
Yeah.
Along with a couple of Lutherans, a couple of Methodists, again, you know, really ecumenical. I don't know how I got in that group, but I did. When I first moved here in 1996, I was the associate with Barry Downing at Northminster.
At Northminster.
When I first, that's what
Yeah.
brought me here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea, though, especially for those longtime members, this is the only church some of those folks had known.
Their whole lives.
Yeah, it must be terribly difficult. And how do they move then from a church that is closing its doors as a Lutheran church, opening the doors as a Pentecostal congregation?
Right, they've moved on. My 98-year-old, actually, you think he's 100 now. I don't know that he's going anywhere. Life has slowed down for him. A bunch of the others went to the Episcopal church around the corner. Holy Nativity had a high liturgical service, as we like to say. They came to the rail, you know, the front rail to get their communion, and they had kneelers. So the Episcopal church has felt like a good home for them, St. Paul's. A couple of others went to the Lutheran church in Endwell, across from Northminster, Our Savior. And a couple of others, I'm not sure what they're doing, but most have found new church homes.
Yeah. So the transition that you made, being educated at a Presbyterian seminary, then working most recently at the United Church of Christ in Binghamton, now you've become a Lutheran. What's the transition like?
Sort of.
Highly liturgical.
Right. I ended up loving it, although at first it was extremely foreign. You can sing the whole Lutheran service. I tried. Not the whole service. A church member lent me this tape on how to sing the communion section. It's very beautiful. I kind of mangled it. But we chanted the psalm every week. Yeah. And of course they have communion every week. So I shortened the sermon a little bit. Not much. But there is quite a bit of... I learned on the job. I would have church members gently remind me, well, the Christ candle really should be lit on this particular Sunday. So, you know, I kind of feel that I would tell church members, if something's not done and you know it should be done, just light it. Yep. Go up and light the Christ candle, or move it, because it needs to be moved at certain parts. We weren't very big, so we didn't have a processional. So I didn't have to worry about the cross, you know, being carried in or anything like that, and the torches. But the communion itself, I practiced. Wednesdays, when I had office hours, I'd go into the sanctuary, set the communion table up, and just kind of take it apart and put it back together. Because they have the chalice and the paten, they're covered, and you have to put it back together after you serve communion. Right. Just, you know, little things that you just had to get used to. And crossing. An Episcopal friend told me to use 2 fingers. It looks better. So I got better at that. That you go this way when...
If you just watch a baseball game, you can see how to do that.
Well, you know, in Rome, do as the Romans do. I did learn. And as I said, I ended up loving the liturgy. I loved chanting the psalm. And I did, a couple times I sang the communion. Pretty badly, but I have been in the Lutheran service. I used to live in Manhattan, and I used to go to all sorts of churches. And when the whole service is sung, except the sermon, it's really beautiful, seriously beautiful. Plain chanted, which I've always loved. There's a part of me, I was raised Baptist, but as you know, I went to Mass, and there's a part of me that loves that sort of thing.
Yes, well, that's part of your upbringing.
It is. I feel at home in both.
Yeah. But we have an emotional attachment sometimes that is sometimes the underpinning of our theology instead of the other way around.
Exactly, yeah. I think these rituals go all the way back to the 1st century. So,
I remember serving as I guess it was just twice maybe, at the Lutheran Church in Binghamton. And we met the pastor there because she was part of our lectionary group at that church in Endicott. And I remember the choreography of the doing the sacrament, that it was quite different from what I was used to.
Yes.
And you do get worried about whether it's the cloth goes over this, or
Well,
is
there's a little square, and then you have the cloth.
Yeah.
So the square goes first, and then the cloth, and you try to center it as much as possible because you only have so much time.
Yeah.
The organ is playing, and you've got about 50 seconds to put that all back together. I got pretty good at it.
And I'm thinking in the great cosmic universe, when God is looking at the way the sacrament is done in all these various churches. If you mess up, I don't think it's, there are signs of grace all around.
Yes, so. That's what I hope for.
Yeah.
A little grace, because really communion is, unfortunately, it's where we differ.
Yeah. Yes.
And it really shouldn't be, but it is.
Yeah, we differ in, of course, from the Catholics. There are 7 sacraments. In the Reformed or Protestant tradition, we have 2. And I remember being in a group once where some of the Catholic folks were asking me, do you have Mass? I said, well, we have Holy Communion, but we don't have Mass.
Right.
And what's the difference? Well, it became a teachable moment. Someone has said, well, do you read the Bible? And I thought, well, yes, we have the same Bible.
That's the centerpiece of our service, in my opinion. It's the Word.
Yes, the proclamation of the Word.
Yeah.
When I think about the idea of denominations which are having in common the breaking of bread, the drinking of the cup, and I say the cup instead of wine or grape juice.
Yes, or both.
It takes me back to the stories you told in our pulpit a couple of weeks ago. I'd love to hear both those stories again.
Would you like me to tell those stories again?
Yes, I would.
I have my 2 bread stories, because when I bring communion up, because they're both funny.
Yeah.
My very first communion was at the hospital in Houston. I was actually ordained to that, which is unusual. My committee I was ready. It was West Jersey Presbyterian, so I was ordained in October. And when I got back to Houston, I had to do communion that weekend, my very first as an ordained person. So I was thrilled. So I was driving along to the hospital and saw this bread store, very fancy bread, and I thought, really, I should stop and get a really special loaf of bread that's Texan. So it was expensive at the time. I didn't make much, but I bought this big loaf of bread that was jalapeno cheese. I'm not realizing this wasn't the best bread to pick to give communion, because people came to the communion service. We had a beautiful chapel, and family members of the patients. Some patients came with their IV poles, right?
Yeah.
Those poor people, because I gave them this bread as communion, and I choked them. And I was picturing the article in the paper, local chaplain chokes patient, because they were trying to say amen as I handed them the body of Christ with little pieces of jalapeno in it. So I never did that again. That was a life lesson. And I got the plainest bread possible.
And how do you wash that down then?
Right, with a nice slug of awful wine. I also had to drink. I worked with ministers there who would hand me the whole chalice of really bad red wine first thing in the morning. And here, you drink this. Oh, no. We also had a special sink that went to the ground. That's where you pour the wine.
I'll share my story after you share your second story.
And my second story, sweet little Presbyterian church, and one Sunday the deacons forgot that it was communion. So they used what they had, which was they had very full freezers in their church. They like to save everything. So when it came time for me to do the bread, I took off the handkerchief, and there was a very solidly frozen hot dog roll, which gave me the giggles. And I did giggle a little. You're not supposed to. And people weren't really realizing what was going on until I said, and Jesus gave thanks to God, he broke it, and it really made a huge snap because the church was silent. And then everybody really laughed, guffawed, along with me.
Right.
But it was, So the holy hot dog roll.
Well, I remember
when
you talked about drinking the chalice, and of course in the Presbyterian tradition, I would share with our viewers and listeners that we don't use in most churches wine, although many of us who are worshiping now at home, if we are at home, we do drink wine.
And some churches have both.
Yeah, and our church in Richmond, Virginia
has been a compromise.
Had both, so you had your choice. But I was at a youth conference in Shrinemont Conference Center in Virginia among the Episcopal youth. And I was asked the night before the Sunday service, Jeff, you're speaking to our youth, you're doing the keynote. Would you lead communion tomorrow? And I said, well, I'm not sure what your bishop would think about that if the Presbyterian came in and did communion. But he said, well, all the other priests who are here today have to be back in their churches tomorrow. And I said, well, then I'll be glad to do it. Let you suffer the consequences, with your bishop. And they said, well, we'll have a deacon who will help you. I said, great. So 100 kids are standing in a circle, and here's the wine, and so the wine is passed around, and all the kids are drinking from this one chalice. And I don't know that somebody was wiping it off, but just they figured the germs are killed by the alcohol, you know.
Well,
So it comes back and it's refilled along the way because there's 100 kids. And then the almost full chalice is put down, and it dawned on me that I was going to have to drink that whole chalice. And I'm not a wine person. I can drink a little slug of communion wine from that little cup. But so I turned to the deacon and whispered under my breath, "Are we expected to drink all of this?" And he said, "Yes, we are." And then he let a beat go and say, "But I'll take care of it later." So I was much relieved, and when the bread went around, there was no drama whatsoever.
Right.
But it was.
I only did that once, that I drank the whole chalice. Yeah, that's you can pour it on the ground. That's actually allowed.
Yeah.
As long as it goes back to Mother Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we used to, in one church, the bread would be thrown to the birds. We
Right.
figured that was a good thing to do with the leftover bread.
I have another little story. At the hospital, I had a pretty full chalice, which I stopped doing because a doctor came to the service and was kneeling and grabbed the chalice and just ended up dumping it all down. Of course, they had their white coat on, which was then pink. And we both stood there horror-stricken. She was kneeling horror-stricken, I was standing horror-stricken. I said, "I'm so sorry." And I went, I had to get more wine. And she got up and dripped out of the chapel. Yeah.
These are
little mishaps.
Our sacred times in terms of the sacraments, the stories that we tell, and every clergy person can tell.
Sacred and human at the same time.
Yes,
it's
of
what
course.
the sacred and humanity really meet. So you have to laugh, you have these things happen, but mostly it's a beautiful, wonderful sacrament,
Right.
and everyone joins in. I think its bottom line is it's a time of sharing.
And you have a wonderful sense of humor. That must help.
I hope so. I try to make them laugh.
Yeah.
At least once a day.
Yeah.
And I think that humor is really important in the sermon as well, and maybe in Bible study too. To make it interesting and fun, helps people listen.
Yes. Janet, thank you so much for coming to our back porch.
Well, Jeff, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
My guest today has been the chaplain at Elizabeth Church in St. Louise Manor, one of the part of the United Methodist Homes, the Reverend Janet Abel. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us for the Encounter program. I'm Jeff Kellam, the parish associate, the old retired guy at the Union Presbyterian Church on Main Street, Endicott. Thank you for being with us, and also thanks to WBNG TV for carrying the Encounter program. I hope that in the coming week you'll be gentle with people and with yourself.